Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. The protests over Jallikattu ban in Tamil Nadu took a violent turn today after remaining mostly peaceful over the last 6 days. The violence erupted in retaliation to police action against the protesters who were assembled at Marina Beach in Chennai, which also served as the epicenter of the entire agitation. Thousands of youth, men and women had taken to the streets demanding a permanent lifting of a ban on the age-old bull taming sport, which according to them is a significant part of Tamil culture. On the other hand, the protesters also demanded action against international animal rights group PETA, which has been strongly advocating a ban on the sport. On this edition of The Big Picture, we'll analyze the mass protests on the bull taming sport and if there is a solution in sight. Joining me on the program today are Dr. Rakesh Bhattabyal, Associate Professor, JNU, Siddharth Varadarajan, Founding Editor, TheWire.in, Amrit Lal, Associate Editor of The Indian Express, and J. Sai Deepak, Advocate of the Delhi High Court. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Siddharth Varadarajan, I'd like to start with you, of course. Thus far, the protests have been, very peaceful, but today we saw it take an ugly turn. We saw some protests in Chennai. Now, is that going to change things?
Well, I don't know if the fact that the Assembly has now passed the bill, has converted the ordinance into a regular legislation, whether this will have some effect in sending people home. But by all accounts, what triggered the turn to violence in Chennai and other places was the decision to deploy the police and use force. Somewhere down the line, until this point, the state government and the protesters and indeed the central government had all said they were on the same page. And why the use of force was necessary rather than, well-planned, well-thought-out communication where the state government is able to tell people exactly what it's done and why the protest needs to be called off. And, to have done that in an organized fashion, perhaps even involving the chief minister or other important political leaders, maybe all-party delegation. Somewhere down the line, I think there's been a miscalculation by the AIADMK government in Tamil Nadu because, sending policemen in and using strong arm tactics on the protesters at Marina Beach, that seems to be what the trigger has been. I don't buy this logic that all of a sudden these protesters have become anti-national or that they've become anti-social the way that the police or other political parties are trying to say. This is essentially miscalculation by the law enforcement authorities and by the political authority in Tamil Nadu, and that's what you're seeing on the streets now is a consequence of that. Anger has boiled over because for the first time you now have on the issue, essentially the state government now openly pitting itself against these protesters.
Indeed. J. Sai Deepak, I'd like to bring you in now, of course, because several of the protesters have said that the protests are now over, that the bill has been passed. Now, as far as the bill itself is concerned, is it constitutionally and politically proper?
See, as far as the constitutional aspects are concerned, I'm not sure what is it that can be unconstitutional about this. And since it's early days, and to be honest, I still haven't applied my mind to the nuances of the provisions. I've had an opportunity to take a look at it, and so far it seems okay. And we have had instances in the past where decisions of the Supreme Court on something more serious have been reversed by the executive and the legislature through other amendments, the Shabana case being one of those examples. So I think the constitutional aspect of this legislation is something that we have to look into, but so far I think it seems okay. The political aspect of it, and just to build on what Mr. Varadarajan has said, see, at a time when the state government has managed to address the core concerns of the protesters and has managed to do something about Jallikattu, I think it would be really foolish on their part to do something to upset the apple cart at this stage. So I really wouldn't blame the state government for triggering the current situation at this point of time, because I suspect something else has happened. And as more and more news seems to trickle in, you can't call each of these protesters and every one of those protesters as anti-national elements. But there have been slogans that have been raised and there have been issues that have been raised which have got nothing to do with the primary object of the protest, which is somehow to get this culture back, or this to have the freedom to organize Jallikattu. So I suspect something else has happened, and this is entering a much more serious realm because neither the central government nor the state government or any of these establishment entities have any kind of vested interest in in upsetting the apple cart, so to speak, after having delivered the goods on the core issue. So I think something else is happening here, and perhaps time will tell us what exactly is happening on the political front. Because I don't think the protesters at this point of time have limited the scope of their issues only to the issue of Jallikattu. It has gone much beyond that. And we'd like to see who are the actors who are behind this.
Amrit Lal, is there more to it than meets the eye, as J. Deepak Sai is suggesting?
No, I think right from the beginning there has been an opposition to the political establishment. Most of the politicians who tried to address the gathering were not allowed in. And I think, as Mr. Varadarajan said earlier, till the other day the state government seems to be completely in sync with the protesters' demand that this is a matter of cultural pride, and the state was with them. So what exactly happened in the morning today that, suddenly the police dawned on, police arrived in Marina and started using force to disperse these people? Could it be because that, you had to clear the ground for the January 26th event? So we really don't know, what exactly forced it, but the protesters could also have been taken aback that the government till the other day was supporting us, and what exactly has gone wrong. There must have been a sense of betrayal, I suppose.
Okay, fine, fair enough. Professor Bhattabyal, in 2014, when the Supreme Court passed its order saying that Jallikattu cannot be held anymore, we did not see such kind of protests. What has prompted these protests this time around?
I think, as all of them are saying, is a lack of communication at one level, and the second is the complete change in the power structure, center as well as in the state. Suddenly, the absence of Jallikattu or a very strong administrator is suddenly realized by not only friends but also the foes. So, and secondly, you see, Jallikattu is primarily a rural sport, and an issue which is primarily should be gravitating towards the rural area, where an urban crowd behavior historically has been different from where a mass mobilization happened on the rural question. Here also there's no organization, apparently there's no organization, there is no organized effort, and therefore a completely spontaneous move, apparently very spontaneous urban crowd, which takes up the issue of culture, which is primarily at the moment, Tamil Nadu is the most urbanized state, so to say, in the country. So in that, an issue which has rural bearing, very strong rural bearing, which therefore also invoke the bearings of the caste dynamics in the state. Therefore, all the local politics, or the state politics, now come on to play on this event. Because don't forget, in 1960-65, when the anti-Hindi and agitation began in Tamil Nadu was different. So, and there was a communication where there were strong leaders who could communicate. Today, neither there's Jayalalitha or from AIDMK some leader who is strong enough, powerful enough, tall enough. On the other hand, Karunanidhi is also not in a position to communicate in that sense. So there's no, in all regional performer, if you go to all the regions, there are 1 or 2 or 3 big leaders. Every state you go, Nitish Kumar, Lalu Yadav. Suddenly Tamil Nadu is feeling the vacuum. Stalin is not taking that kind of a position. He cannot take, maybe because Karunanidhi is already there. And therefore the local power vacuum or the leadership vacuum is telling on the situation at this moment.
Indeed. Siddharth Varadarajan, do you agree with with the assessment of Professor Bhattabyal? The lack of a strong leader in Tamil Nadu has in a way created this vacuum and hence the protests.
Yes, that may partly explain why in 2014 or 2015 you didn't see this kind of an upsurge, even though the legal position remained the same. But I think that what we are seeing manifested here is not just the political vacuum, particularly the absence of Jayalalitha, which has in a way opened the terrain for, has opened the door for political change, going well beyond the traditional alternating power structure between DMK and ADMK to something more complex, in which perhaps different caste groups are asserting themselves, and the whole issue of Tamil identity, Tamil pride, connected to issues like Kaveri, are all coming to the fore. So if the issue that this protest, even from day one, was never entirely or exclusively about Jallikattu. Jallikattu may be the trigger, but if you look at the slogans that people raised, if you look at the placards they were holding, if you look at the conversations that the news media recorded people having, it was clear that Jallikattu was in a way a metaphor for a wider sense of feeling under siege, a culture feeling as if it's not getting its due recognition, a feeling that Tamil Nadu somehow, say in the context of the Kaveri dispute, is getting stepmotherly treatment from the center. So there's a whole range of issues that have really come to the fore here. And, I don't think that it's only today, now that the ordinance has been signed or the bill has been passed, that the protesters have moved on to other issues. They made it pretty clear from day one that there's a whole range of things that animate them, that concern them. Of course, the protest is narrowly framed around the issue of Jallikattu, but we would be missing the point if we were to think of this as purely an urban population getting agitated about the threat to a rural sport. There's a lot more that is perceived to be riding on Jallikattu, and I think the idea that somehow the Supreme Court could have declared this sport illegal, and that for the last 2 years the centre of the state have in a sense taken this lying down, on top of all the other grievances, real or imagined, that people in Tamil Nadu face. This is what has produced the kind of mass, I wouldn't call it an uprising, that's the phrase that people have been using in Tamil Nadu, but the mass upsurge that was so visible in Marina Beach for 6 consecutive days.
Indeed. Amrit Lal, could this decision of, bringing forth this bill have been taken earlier? Why wait for this last moment and pass it now?
And I think they had to prepare their ground to have a executive action, override the Supreme Court. So, I mean, the court is hearing the case. But I want to add the other thing, that it's not just about Jallikattu. Jallikattu has become a sort of lightning rod for a slew of issues, especially this whole question of farm registers. And unlike in 2014 when the court had done, I mean, the last 2 years Tamil Nadu had seen a major drought, and there have been structural changes happening in the countryside. So these things had created a certain kind of social turmoil which the political establishment had not really addressed. So all these things have come to the fore. I mean, the Indian Express reports right from day one had said that, this was not just about Jallikattu. Jallikattu had become a symbol for a certain rural unrest, rural disgruntlement with the political establishment. So those things also we need to factor in. The second thing is that it's an urban protest certainly, but most of these people are people who are first generation migrants, or who just come to study or work in Chennai or places like, the cities. And they do have an umbilical cord with the rural population, and they seems to be upset that, their concerns, the rural Tamil Nadu's concerns, are not really responded to by the political establishment. The drought, for example, there has been no real initiative from the state government. And very often, these questions are essentially subsumed in, say, for example, the water issue basically gets subsumed in this Kaveri dispute. What happens locally, what is done within the state is generally not discussed. So all these things, I think, that had built up, creating the environment for this sort of a mobilization across the state.
Indeed. All right. Let's move the debate forward now. Sai Deepak, as far as the exemption being given to Jallikattu, can it be invalidated?
See, from the looks of it, there are 3 primary exemptions that have been carved out in the bill. One is that there is a separate definition that has been provided for Jallikattu. And 2, there is a specific exemption that has been carved out for Jallikattu under section 11, subsection 3, as one of the sports or one of the activities or actions which is exempt from the umbrella of treating animals cruelly. That's one. Second, there's also there's another provision which specifically says that nothing in this act or nothing in the PCA, the Prevention of Corruption Act, which deals with cruelty or which penalizes a certain act, shall have any bearing on Jallikattu. These are broadly the issues. As far as validity is concerned, I don't see a problem, because there are 2 specific limbs on the basis of which this bill has been promulgated. One is promotion and protection of culture and tradition, that specifically finds mention in the bill. And the second is the protection of native breeds of bulls. So these are 2 aspects. So fortunately, at least there is one aspect which is objective in nature and which is relatively scientific compared to the other, because protection of culture and tradition may not be entirely objective, but be that as it may, I'm not saying it's not valid merely because it's not objective. So one would like to see what kind of challenge could this particular bill be subjected to. And knowing what the Animal Welfare Board has been doing for the last, I think, 10 years, it started in 2006, I would expect this particular bill to also be challenged. See, let's understand one thing. Any piece of legislation is open to challenge, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is something problematic with it. And we'll have to see what is it that they have to say against this, because honestly at this point I don't see any constitutional reasons that can come in the way of sustaining this particular bill. So I think it's a question of wait and watch. And the only question that one has to ask oneself is, what does it say with respect to the relationship between the executive and the judiciary by and large? That's one question that we have to raise. And let's be honest, this is not the first time that this has happened in the history of this country. So when the Supreme Court says something, and I have my own reservations about the judgment that was passed on the 7th of May 2014, with due respect, be that as it may, what should be the executive's response to it in order to, let's say, meet the expectations of the population? What do they do? Either you lose out on this particular constituency, or you get accused of overturning the decision of a Supreme Court through a legislation. So it's a catch-22 for any establishment, regardless of whichever regime it may be. So I think that's one interesting aspect that has not been debated as much.
Indeed, indeed. Professor Bhattabayal, the Supreme Court came out with guidelines, in 2006, and said that follow these 12 guidelines and then we'll allow Jallikattu to happen in Tamil Nadu. But that was not followed, and hence the ban in 2014. Do you see the Supreme Court coming up with similar kind of guidelines again?
I think it should, and it will, to my mind, because what this entire episode, if Jallikattu is, I'm taking Jallikattu as a very serious issue for the animal welfare, animal right activist, or even the larger domain where the state and society wants to be much more compassionate, not towards just human being, but towards all its other allied species on the earth. In that sense, what it does is the issue of contravening, or in fact 1960 Animal Cruelty Act. No, it is about that particular section where people have been objectively showing that in the entire episode of Jallikattu, there are areas, there are domains, there are events, or I would say methods in which there are cruelty shown to the animal. So that is a precise case where the Supreme Court is taking cognizance of. And therefore the large number of people who are arraigned against the entire sport called Jallikattu have been arguing for. Therefore there's a very limited case. Now if that is a limited case and Supreme Court is hearing that limited order, it's within the Supreme Court's or the judicial purview to pass an order on that. Similar, for instance, many such cases have been sent to Supreme Court, lower courts, and in fact many other cases, for instance, banning or in fact eliminating dissection in the school has been done. So we have to bring out, or not just legislator, executive, but even Supreme Court may come out with certain suggestions, like 12 suggestions they have given earlier. They can come out and in congruence with Animal Welfare Board and other bodies, that one should go ahead with these kind of suggestions. So what's wrong in having moving ahead with these very emancipatory suggestions? For Jallikattu is just one. There are several other cases across the country where cruelty to animal is a widely prevalent till last decade, and they have just gone out because people have abided by certain regulations, certain norms that have come up.
Indeed. Siddharth Varadarajan, as far as the centre is concerned, the protesters directed their eye not just at the state government in Tamil Nadu, but at the central government as well. But considering that the matter was sub judice, could the central government have done more?
Why not? I mean, just as the central government, just as the state government has acted, despite the matter being sub judice, the centre also should have, taken cognizance and acted faster. Particularly since, as today I saw a press conference of Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, where he essentially listed out the manner in which Jallikattu was made illegal, primarily by decisions taken by the previous UPA government of the Congress. So if you are coming out today and saying it's all the Congress party's fault, then the question arises that why did it take 2 years and this kind of mass mobilization and this kind of crisis for you to try to find a solution? So I think that the centre and the state government are both guilty of dragging their feet on this. They should have anticipated the depth of public sentiment. They should also have anticipated and found a way to deal with concerns about animal cruelty, for example, by perhaps coming up with a draft law that builds into it or incorporates into it very stringent norms on ensuring that there's no cruelty to the bulls in the practice of Jallikattu. So there's a whole bunch of ways in which the centre and the state government should have played this out properly, rather than acting at the last minute in panic mode and coming up with a law that tomorrow the Supreme Court may well invalidate. So I think that the making haste in this manner after having wasted 2 years is not a very wise thing in politics, and certainly if the idea was to ensure that Jallikattu as a sport continues and does so in a way that does not harm the bull, and that addresses the concerns of all those the legitimate concerns of those who are concerned, those who worry about cruelty to animals, then I'm afraid the centre and the state have not been, they've not been proactive. They ought to have been proactive, and the fact that the Supreme Court was seized of the matter is hardly an alibi or an excuse.
Indeed. Amrit Lal, as far as the state government and the central government are concerned, was it just a case of, nothing had happened in 2 years, so let the status quo remain and let things continue as they are? And it was a case of probably they were caught off guard at the end by seeing this mass protest erupt in Tamil Nadu.
Every Pongal season, which is when the Jallikattu season also begins, this sort of a protest has been happening, except that the state government had chose to ignore it, and perhaps because there was a very strong chief minister, the kind of mobilization which we saw this year didn't happen earlier. So there is a question of, as I said, there are also, let's not limit the debate to Jallikattu in the sense that the protest might have been also influenced by the television debates about drought in Tamil Nadu, the farm distress in Tamil Nadu. So there might have been factors which enabled this sort of mobilization to happen through social media and all these instruments. So those things perhaps the centre and the state were not prepared for. They didn't expect that this is likely to go the way it really turned out to. And nobody had expected that, one, so many people will land up, two, it's likely to last for this long. And since, and we should understand that, the register of political protest in Tamil Nadu for a long time has been culture. The Tamil pride, Tamil traditions, all these things are basically what brings people cutting across caste and the class and political preferences to the street. And that's been the case with Kaveri, been the case with Idam protests. We have seen this. So this again, so Jallikattu has, the focus on Jallikattu should also not make us forget that, there might be other reasons, more substantial and deeper reasons why people are feeling miffed with the political establishment. Because there is clear evidence that, there is a certain kind of anger against the political establishment. It may not necessarily be only about their inability to address the ban. This is how I look at it.
Okay, fair enough. Sai Deepak, as far as the entire issue itself is concerned, we have not looked at it from the other perspective, from the animal rights group's perspective, and they've been saying from the beginning that, we're going to take up this issue right till the end because we are concerned about the animals. So as far as the animal rights groups are concerned, what are the options before them?
I don't want to play the advocate for the animal groups here, not because it's necessarily unpopular, but because I myself don't agree with what they've done. These are my personal views, of course. There are 2 points and 2 clarifications, I think, which are in order. So, from the judgment of 7th of May 2014 of Justice Radhakrishnan, it's not as if nothing has happened. 2015, there was a review petition that was preferred by the state government, which got dismissed. Then the 2011 notification of the centre was again amended in 2016, which is what got the Animal Welfare Control Board back into the picture, challenging the notification which allowed Jallikattu. So it's not as if the centre has not done anything as far as this particular issue is concerned. I think this is one of the things that the centre has tried to do. Secondly, there's one thing that we certainly have to consider. This is not something that was initiated by the centre or by a political establishment sitting in the centre to try and ban Jallikattu. This all started in 2006 by a judgment of the Madras High Court, the Madurai bench. Then subsequently it went to the division bench and so on and so forth. This is how it has snowballed into this. Now, for the last 2 years, despite having made best efforts before the Supreme Court, since they did not see any light at the end of the tunnel, looks like all of a sudden there's been a crystallization of all the frustration this particular year. And perhaps nobody can put a finger and say perhaps it is this year that all of a sudden we'll see an outburst of emotions. So that's something that nobody can predict. 2, as far as the animal rights advocates are concerned, I do believe that they have some serious questions to ask of themselves. See, I don't wish to question anybody's intentions, what their political motivations and so on and so forth. That's not something, that's not my place. But there is one thing that we certainly have to ask ourselves. Section 28 of this legislation, the PCA of 1960, specifically says that the manner in which a certain animal is killed shall not be questioned and shall not constitute an offense if it has some kind of religious sanction. This is the so-called position that's been taken by this legislation. Therefore, there is a specific recognition of any kind of exemptions on religious grounds. Therefore, it must be equally available for people to have exemptions on the basis of cultural or traditional grounds. So let's not talk as if the Prevention of Corruption, the Cruelty Act or the Cruelty of Animals Act is entirely based on science and does not take into account religion, the tradition of this place, the customs of this place. No, it does. It does. So let's be very clear about that. Therefore, if somebody were to challenge this bill on the ground, no, look, how can you introduce culture and tradition as part of this legislation which is meant to prevent cruelty to animals? Sorry, that the legislation already acknowledges. So that's one thing that they have to consider. Therefore, I think one of the issues that has been missed out in this entire debate is perhaps the frustration of the protesters with respect to the double standards that we seem to employ with respect to certain practices and the coming down harshly on certain other practices, and somewhere I think that is reflected in the manner in which they've come out against it, saying, if you really have a problem with this, why don't you go after anyone who slaughters animals? Why don't you go after certain practices, certain festivals? This is the common perception that we have seen. Therefore, if animal advocates really want to make sure that they reach out to the other side, and I think that's a very important part of their mandate at this stage, they have to reach out to the community as well. They will have to explain their position better, and they'll have to ensure that they strike a balance between their position on this issue and on other issues.
Yes.
That's very, very important.
Indeed, indeed.
And
that is a very
I just
important
have one point to make.
Yeah.
During the course of these protests, we have seen a lot of callous statements made, and in fact, downright challenges made to these protesters saying Tamil Nadu will never be able to celebrate Jallikattu again. I think when law and order is in question, when public safety is in question, and people are trying to assuage tempers, frayed tempers, to make these kind of statements during the course of the controversy itself is like adding fuel to the fire, which should have been completely avoided.
Sure, fair enough. Completely out of time on the program, so one quick final closing comment from you, Professor Bhattabyal. As far as the bill itself is concerned, do you believe that it has assuaged the sentiments of the people and the protesters? That is one, and we've forgotten the human aspect of the entire Jallikattu issue. There have been several lives lost as well. Now that too is a serious concern.
Whenever you have a large mobilization like this, how to assuage the feeling is the first job of any civil society, a civilized society. That is one. The second is, as pointed out, the animal rights activist or any rights activist in that sense, there are always going to be attrition in the society because the right-based approach creates attrition, and therefore the caution is that in a society where the institutions are at varying levels of development, evolution, right-based approach also has a limit where sometimes they may end up having this kind of backlash where we go back 100 years and then we have to start again. So therefore it's also a cautionary statement on, as esteemed lawyer was talking about, to all those rights activists, that this is a time that we have to take our stock together and see how we get the interest of animals or all our allied species protected by having a consensus in the society in a larger frame of reference, where we have to convert people rather than defeat them in a war of attrition.
Indeed. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Rakesh Bhattabyal, Siddharth Vadarajan, Amrit Lal and Jay Sai Deepak, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. Thank you for watching.